All right.
How
Hey,
you
Sal.
doing, Bill?
Good. Hanging in there.
Great.
Been a bit of a zoo, but the public hearings are about over for the Connecticut legislature, which is a relief.
Oh, that's good. Good. Bill, this is Christina Froner.
Hi,
And Lucy,
Christine.
our guest speaker.
Hi, Bill.
Hi.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too.
Christina's in charge of all of our beach surveys.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
It's a nice way to get to know our immediate surroundings. So it's really educational.
Oh, yeah, definitely. You got to get out there. That's really how it works, right?
Well, it's just going out there. And it's amazing. Like through Christina, she's brought me around the island. Like there's so many parts of the coastline I've never seen around here. You know, it's so cool. They're like the little marshlands I'd never seen before. We have this 5-acre marshland. I'd never noticed it.
Yeah, same here. Same here. I mean,
So
through the
cool.
project, we
Where's
also got access to private properties that we would otherwise probably not have gotten to. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's going to be a big deal is finding what's left, right?
Hmm.
And
Exactly.
then working on those areas. I have a little slide at the end where I think I figured out where you guys are doing your wetland. Is it right by the school? Isn't there like a wetland right?
Exactly.
Right? Yeah, it's a cool little,
It's a
nice little
cool,
piece of.
we're very lucky. And thanks for your support. I mean, that's all through the Long Island
Oh,
Sound
of course.
Stewardship Fund. And, you know, they know you guys. So your support on that project is huge.
And there's also the wetland on the other side, right?
Exactly.
Hmm.
Over by one of our board members,
That.
Valent. You see that
Oh, go ahead.
on Ditmar Street and Tier Street. So it's on the west side of the island, more toward the north. And there's 5 acres of wetlands.
And that is publicly owned, correct?
Well, there's the City Island Wetlands, which is sort of like a little coastal area owned by Parks Department.
Oh, I see.
And then there's a larger marshland area that kind of cuts into City Island. And that's owned by a guy, Haim Joseph. And he's willing to let us do work there and give us access. So that it sounds promising.
Sally, I was wondering if you want to make me co-host again so I can
Yes,
help
please.
you muting people.
Please. I do that. Should I do
So I
that?
have about a. Sorry, I have about a half an hour. Is that about what you were looking for?
That sounds great, Bill. Perfect.
Okay.
Okay, now one part, who can share? Is it under screen share?
Participants.
Oh, under participants are.
You select my name, and then there's like more.
Yeah.
And then you have the option to make me co-host.
Oh, great. There we go. Make co-host.
And I'll need that too.
Yeah, we'll have you co-host too. And I have screen. Let me co-host with you too, Bill. Good. Bill. Yep. Yep.
And the screen share.
And the screen share I have on multiple participants can screen share. So I think we're good to go. We were talking about you guys today. We were meeting with, we're trying to figure out, you know, some BOP is very interested in partnering with us, which is great, Billy Oyster Project. And they kind of want to go after some money together. So we're trying to explore that. And so we were talking about our work with you guys and water quality monitoring. We actually came up twice today. We had 2 meetings, and we also met with New Jersey Baykeeper, and you know, Allison Fitch. Do you know Allison Fitzgerald?
Fitzgerald, I don't.
She works there, and she runs their oyster project in Soundview. And he was talking about like the different aspects that what we should be looking at each site around the island, and water quality monitoring kept coming up.
Yeah, I know like the Hackensack Keeper and Hugh, Corolla. Hey, Sid, those guys. So I only deal with the water keepers themselves, but they all have staff. That's quite a story they have with their oyster project, having to move it on to military water because they got raided by the state. Did they tell you that
Oh,
story?
no. So what's I don't know the backstory, Bill. What is that? What happened?
So they got this is what I heard. I can't remember who told me, one of them down there. There's that little handful of keepers on that side of Manhattan, south of the or I guess it would be east of the or west of the river keeper zone. And they got it going, and DEC said, oh, people are going to come in there and take them and get sick. So they came in and took their stuff.
Wow.
So they cut a deal because there's some military boundaries down there, Air Force, I think.
Yeah, she said she's in a weapons installation, the Earl Station, weapon station.
That's why they're there, because DEC was raiding their restoration.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow.
Don't tell them I told you that.
I've always wondered why they're in a naval base.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting, right? Oh God.
Wow.
If they're going after the scientists, we don't have a prayer.
But you guys are talking to DEC, so they know what you're doing. And
Yeah.
you've got a Long Island Sound Futures grant. And
Yep.
and it's all relaxing. The state of Connecticut was really bad. I do have one slide showing there's a new Connecticut Shellfish Restoration Committee, and they're trying to break through that. They're just they just don't want people getting oysters and getting sick. But what they don't realize is people are poaching oysters everywhere anyway.
I see. So it doesn't really make a difference.
Oh yeah, I was out duck hunting in a swamp in Guilford with Peter Linderoth, and you can see.
I'm from Guilford.
Oh, you are? Oh, okay, yeah.
It's my hometown.
It's that big reservoir.
Oh yeah.
That's like the road. What's the name of the road? I forget. But it gets kind of narrow, and it's not all the way on the coastline, and it necks down under the road. But if you go upstream, it opens to that big lake with the trail around it.
Yes.
So there's like rocks right there where we're launching our canoe, and people like chiseled the oysters off the rock. Wow, they really wanted those oysters.
Wow.
Oh yeah, Guilford's great. You got the Thimble Islands.
Thimble Islands are great. I taught sailing at Yale Yacht Club in Brantford for years, and we used to bring our kids sailing. That was the end of the season trip. So we would sail from Brantford to the Thimble Islands, and we would spend the night there with the kids.
Nice. Did you know Steve Benjamin?
Oh, sure. Steve Benjamin taught me how to sail.
Really? He's on the Soundkeeper Task Force.
Oh, you're kidding me.
Yeah.
Bill?
Yeah.
Oh my God, I have to reconnect with him. So he graduated from Yale before, just as I'm younger than him. So I'm teaching there during my high school years. And he was such a huge sailor. He would hang out at the Yale Yacht Club where I taught.
Yeah.
And he taught me how to sail 420s.
No kidding. I owe him a call anyway. He's down in North Carolina. He bought a big spread down there, and he's interested in this whole blue carbon seagrass restoration stuff.
Oh, cool.
Well. Yeah.
My name is, he knows me as Sally Canty. And I sailed
I'll write that down.
Sally Canty, and I sailed a 420 with one of his best friends, Jamie Brown. He and I brought a boat together. And
Jamie Brown, his best friend, and I owned a boat together, and Steve taught us how to sail it.
That is such a
small
world.
world.
Yeah, he was a big 470 sailor, a gifted sailor.
Yeah, well, he won some major races, global races.
He did.
He's like he's a big wig. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Big in the sailing world.
Sure is. That is such a small world.
Yeah.
There's Barbara.
Hey, Barbara.
Hello, Bill. How are you?
Good. I haven't seen you in a while. How are things?
Well, busy, hectic.
That's good.
How about you?
Yeah, I was just telling Sally, the Connecticut legislature is just kind of a crazy time during committee hearings because New York, it goes year round. So they like stop at a reasonable hour. But we had one hearing, which fortunately I didn't have to testify at. So there's Zoom testimony, right?
Oh.
So you get brought into the waiting room, but they have a lottery for the numbers. So instead of like getting up early and getting in line at the Capitol or having one of our lobbyists get in and sign you up quickly, it's just random. So there was one that had like 200 something people signed up, and one of our folks testified at 5:30 in the morning.
Ooh.
I stayed up. That's
What were
starting
you-
at 10 o'clock. The hearing started.
What were
What's
you
that?
What were you testifying about?
Oh, I testified probably on 8 different bills.
Oh,
So
good.
yeah, PFAS, striped bass,
Mhm.
stormwater authorities, which I'm going to talk. I have one slide about that today. God, what else? Resiliency bonding. Looks like Connecticut's going to have maybe $30 million in the governor's bill for actual money that could match federal resiliency grants for doing the stuff you guys are doing, creating coastal wetlands and reefs and beach dunes and all that kind of stuff to protect the shoreline. So we'll see. It's been a hectic year. A lot of good stuff happening
Yeah.
politically.
Oh, okay. Wait, I'm gonna. I do. I see, Sid. I understand you said came to helped out on this weekend.
You were a huge help, Sid. We were basically
Excavator.
there were 8 of us because we were limited in number allowed by Parks Department to bag the shells because we're careful about homemade landfill. And we had 17 cubic yards of shell to bag. And we did it. It was,
Yeah, I gotta say, Liam was an excavator. Really
oh my
helped.
God, he was awesome. There was this great technique that Orion had designed where you have a net underneath a bucket with the bottom cut out. So you shovel the shells into the bucket. It goes then into the bag. So it worked really well. And Liam was shoveling away. It's not easy dealing with oyster shells and shells. They're difficult to handle.
No, it's
They-
not.
They
And they're
There's a operation up on the Quinnipiac River, and they use front end loaders to move the shell.
Yeah.
They put it on a barge, and then
that's,
like-
that's the way, the civilized way to do it. Someday. Do I see Julianne Britannia on the call?
do you?
Yes, Sally.
How are you?
Good. I'm not putting video because I'm eating my dinner with my husband, but I said I have to listen in because I saw this documentary on this and I thought I want to hear more about it. So I'm very interested.
I'm so glad you're joining.
Yeah. How are the boys?
They're doing well, thank you.
Good. Poor Isabella's got COVID, so she's at school with COVID and quarantining. Ugh.
Mm.
Anyway, I'll put quiet on.
Filling up here, isn't it?
It's filling up. Yeah, it's filling up nicely.
How do you pronounce? It's the Hawaiian word, the Kauai Invasive Species Committee.
Yep, Kauai.
Kauai. Okay, because I'm going to introduce you, and I said I don't speak Hawaiian. It's
Yeah. If you put a grant application in Hawaii to their main conservation grant, if you don't use the proper Hawaiian words and all the diphthongs. There's a lot of different phonetic signs. They won't accept your proposal. They're really serious about the language over there. It's really interesting. All the street names are traditional names. It's really wild. So that's where the E comes in, Kauai.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've always pronounced it Kauai.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Hawaii. You've moved around a
We have
lot.
to, Bill, we have to get you out to City Island and show you around the sites when the weather's warmer.
Yeah. I'm ready to get out.
We're getting closer to everyone being, or most people being vaccinated. So
Good. Yeah.
Hey, if anybody should ask, tell them that the email that you sent out produced results, because I totally forgot about this meeting, and the email came in at 5:30 and I got in the house at 6 and opened it up.
oh, good. So the last minute email blast worked.
The last minute e-blast worked.
Great.
Good to know.
That's really good to know.
One more minute, 2 more minutes? What
Yeah,
do you think?
one more minute and we'll start.
You guys have all had your shots?
I've had mine too.
Me too. Psychologically, it's great.
It certainly is. It's a big relief. All right, Barbara, should we, we'll get going?
Yeah.
So just quickly, welcome everyone to our CIOR, the City Island Oyster Reef's 9th webinar in our ongoing educational series about oysters, their role in a healthy, contributing to a healthy marine environment and wetlands ecology. Tonight, we'll begin with Barbara Zahm, introducing our distinguished guest speaker, Bill Lucey from Save the Sound. Save the Sound has been a significant and very important collaborator with the City Island Oyster Reef on a variety of projects. Time permitting, at the end, we'll have time for questions. And I'm so grateful that all of you could join us this evening and took time out of your schedules to be with us. If you wouldn't mind muting yourselves, unless you're speaking at the end and asking a question, that would be great. With that, allow me to turn it over to Barbara Zahm for the introductions. Over to you, Barbara.
Good. Well, yeah, it's very exciting, our partnership with Save the Sound. It's been very, very important to us. And we thank Save the Sound for helping us grow, because we're small, but we're mighty, and we with their help we're getting mightier. I want to announce, I'm not sure people know this, but we were just awarded another grant from the Long Island Sound Stewardship Fund to fund a living shoreline wetlands restoration project behind our local school. It's just the beginning stages of it, and it's of course very exciting. Tonight we're going to have a webinar from Bill Lucey from Save the Sound. I see that you've traveled all over the place, Bill, but you started out in Connecticut and ending up apparently back at Connecticut. But in the meantime, you seem to go to Vermont for your fisheries biology bachelor in science, and then went on to Oregon for your fishery management degree, graduate degree, and then Guatemala into the Peace Corps. I mean, I'm just tracking, watching, seeing you go all over the place here. And then you moved on, it says here, 20 years you worked at the Federal Fish and Wildlife Biology, commercial fisherman at FORNOA, marine mammal stranding responder. I don't know what that means exactly. And a municipal biologist and coastal program coordinator. So then in 2014, you went to Hawaii And you were the director of the Kauai Invasive Species Committee for the University of Hawaii, where you did research, among other things, on beluga whales and harbor seals and Pacific salmon, etc. And then you seem to come back to Connecticut and the Long Island Sound. And we're glad you have. The subject you're going to be talking about today, I believe, is blue carbon, which is very, very dear to my heart, because I just only recently in the last few months learned how important it is in terms of mitigating the climate crisis. And and I know Bill's going to talk more about that, but it's really important to understand how wetlands restorations now can really help mitigate our climate crisis. So, Bill, you take over.
Well, thank you, Sally and Barbara, for the intro. And just for one clarification, the beluga whales were during my time in Alaska, not Hawaii.
Oh, did I miss?
Not a lot of beluga. They like the cold water. But yeah, so I'm going to share my screen. And here we go. I'm going to do slideshow.
You need me?
That's us.
From the beginning. All right, can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is our standard intro slide. So for those who don't know Save the Sound, we're bi-regional. So we're bi-state. We're Connecticut and New York. All the waters that drain into Long Island Sound is where we focus. And we have a pretty diverse set of skills, I guess you could say, or project types. So this is what we call our impact map to give people an idea of the scope of our work. And it's broken down into these different categories. And I'll just go through a few of them, such as the yellow one are legal actions. So we do have attorneys on staff, and we primarily go after Clean Water Act violations. So we have a number of active cases. Actually, just today, I was on a hearing way up here in Springfield, Massachusetts, on a Zoom court hearing with the EPA, the Springfield, Massachusetts wastewater treatment plant, and our lead counsel, Roger. And they're going to get a limit put on them how much nitrogen they can dump down the Connecticut River and into Long Island Sound. And I'll go into why that's important to all this. You all know about those of you who are focused on the Oyster Project with Save the Sound's contribution is this water monitoring. So that's what we excel at. We have Peter Linderoth runs our office out of Mamaroneck, soon to move to Larchmont. And all these orange bays are areas where we have now going to be 24 citizen groups that all record data on salinity, chlorophyll, different environmental parameters, water quality parameters, to get an idea how healthy all the bays and harbors are in the Sound. The smaller icons are bacteria sampling areas. And what we do is we have stations and we look for areas that get really bad bacteria rates. And we know there's a problem there. So we'll go in and investigate and try and figure out why. Is there sewage contamination? What's going on? And so we work with all these towns to try and clean up the water coming out of the pipes. Just another one, fish passage, which I'm going to talk about. It's very related to blue carbon, is removing dams and allowing these rivers to clear out and move sediments. And then we do beach cleanups. We're very involved legislatively in climate policy. So that's just a smattering of what we do. But this is about blue carbon, and it's actually an international initiative, and it's very science driven. If you go to their website, it's a whole collection of science papers and different collaborators across the globe. I put this picture on here because in the background is a marsh at Sherwood Island where I grew up fishing for snappers and catching fiddler crabs. This is my son when we first came back from Hawaii, and you can see he was up to his chest in the muck and the mire catching crabs and just having a blast. He was really happy. But these areas are the battery packs for processing nutrients, especially carbon. So I've never tried this on a webinar before, but I'm going to do it now. This is from the Maritime Aquarium at Norwalk. And I want to bring everybody back in time when there was no human influence on Long Island Sound. So this is what it looks like today. But if you go back 30,000 years, it's land. So this is all land out here. The ocean is 500 feet lower. There's no Long Island Sound. There's water draining off the ice in the back, some going down the East River, some cutting the other way through what will be the race. Then the glaciers come in for 5,000 or 6,000 years and cover the place. And then as things warm up, as all the water got caught in the ice, the skies cleared, more heat came down, then the ice age reverses itself. And you can start to see a familiar pattern emerge. This would be the North Shore of Long Island Sound right here. And this is a big freshwater lake. So that's about 15,000 years ago, not that long ago, about the time people were coming across the Bering Land Bridge into Alaska, the first humans coming into the continent. And then it blew out and all the water drained out. And I've seen that on smaller lakes in Alaska. It's phenomenal. They just release. And now the sea level's coming up and you end up about 12,000 years ago, you have Long Island Sound. So all the estuaries on the planet that are really critical for this blue carbon processing are 7,000 to 12,000 years old. And really simply, this is a very simple way of looking at that. The cycle is there's carbon in the air and it gets taken in by photosynthesis and it gets put down into the roots as it makes structure for the plant. And as those roots die, new ones form, that carbon stays in the soil. And at a certain level, those soils are anaerobic. So it stays there for a long time. And then as sediment comes in, it builds up and the marshes grow. So really what we're trying to do is get something that looks like this on the left. This is a seagrass bed. They focus on mangroves, coastal marshes, and seagrass in the Blue Carbon Initiative. And I have a global map I'll show shortly, but this is a lot of what we're seeing. This is, I don't know, for lack of a better description, frog water. There's too many nutrients. This is salt water, and you get all all the different seaweeds, the green seaweeds in there, and they don't have roots in the ground. They bloom, and then they fall down and drop all that carbon to the top of the benthic zone. But then it becomes mobilized again, and it just gets more and more eutrophic. So here is the historic and existing combined areas where you would expect this blue carbon, this marine processing of carbon. All along here, you have kelp beds, you have salt marshes, mangroves, all along. And so back before these were compromised by development, this was a key component to the global carbon cycle, keeping things balanced. The earth is always moving nutrients around and it goes through these basically processing centers to keep things in check. Now, we all know where the carbon comes from, but I thought I'd throw the slide in since we're talking about it. This is the coal plant at Bridgeport, last one in Connecticut, it's supposed to go down this summer. This is, I don't know, Deegan or Bronx Expressway here. Sewage treatment plants, when I was researching a little more for this webinar, produce 3%, where you're treating sewage, produce 3% of the global carbon, the greenhouse gas emissions, which I found pretty shocking. But if you think about it, they're giant incubators and they're off-gassing. And then a lot of it, of course, is natural. There's always been natural carbon coming down. This is the Long Island Sound watershed. So everything in here eventually ends up in the sound. A leaf drops off into the water, goes down and becomes part of the carbon cycle down in the estuary. Why Save the Sound is so invested in the water quality monitoring and all the work we do is because it's not a good situation in Long Island Sound. We're actually improving, but like most of the estuaries on the planet, we're not in good shape. And here you can see chlorophyll is measured in micrograms per liter. And what the 90th percentile means is the highest 10% reading of a month in the year, and that's averaged. So a normal healthy estuary is going to have around 7 micrograms per liter of chlorophyll, which is all the carbon caught up in phytoplankton. Long Island Sound is 20 times that level you would expect. So it's green, it's murky. You've all seen it when you've been out on boats. It's not a crystal clear body of water, and that's partially why. And the other critical component is dissolved oxygen, because without oxygen, everything dies. So there's 69 different estuaries. So this is the bottom 10th percentile, meaning the worst 10% of the milligrams per liter is averaged per month. And most estuaries around 5.5, and that's fine. You don't start having problems respiring as say a lobster or a fish until it's down around 3 milligrams per liter. So that we would consider that healthy. But the worst days, the worst 10% of days in Long Island Sound gets down to 1. And that's where we get that big dead zone, especially in the Western Sound. So that's what really is driving a lot of the breakdown of the ecosystem. Remember, blue carbon is about recreating a functioning ecosystem to naturally deal with the processes. And this actually is from a paper. The last guy here is Mark Tedesco, is a bigwig on the EPA for funding. All the funding that comes through is through Mark Tedesco. And they're looking at how shellfish aquaculture can really potentially turn around these numbers in this table. But you can't talk about the estuary, you can't talk about blue carbon until you talk about the watershed. So this over a little bit. So this map is a map from Save the Sound that has all the dams that they know of in Connecticut. There's over 4,000 of them. And what's the problem with that? First off, I just want to put in a hopeful picture. I'm going to show you a bad picture, but a solution right next to it. That's kind of the theme of this thing. So that's ripping out a dam. And why do we want to rip out the dams? Because what gets trapped behind the dams? All your sediments. And so the fines will keep moving. The real fine stuff, you know, when you walk in the tide flats and it gets all smoky, that real fine stuff. But a lot of places don't have the sand anymore, or the less tiny particles, because they're all getting caught behind those thousands and thousands of dams, and they're acting as sinks. So as an example, how much sediment can be released, I think this is a picture of the Elwha, which they blew up this dam to open up the Elwha River to salmon out in Washington State, and it blew this huge plume of sediment out. What you really want is every time it rains, the sand grains and the pebbles and clay all slowly move down and into the wetlands, into the coastal marshes. And why is this important for the blue carbon? Well, it builds up that baseline. It builds up the soils. It builds up the elevation of these coastal marshes. And they need to do that, right, to meet climate change. They either need to grow out or grow up, depending if the water is coming or going. And to get into the ecosystem component of this, clams like more sand. The muck gets really anaerobic, but the clams will get in and they associate with eelgrass. So clams and eelgrass are a function, they need to be together for everything to work. And so when you have low organic matter, meaning you have a lot less carbon, a lot less of the fines and the bits of leaves and stuff, and you're mixed more, it's just like gardening. If you want some sand in your soil and you get a nice soil horizon, the plants here will grow big root systems. And this is the same for Spartina, some of your other native partially submerged vegetation, but it holds that whole structure together. So what happens is when you have too much high, Tracy's calling me. If you have too much organic matter, if there's a big sewage plant pumping carbon into the area, there's too much carbon, and you don't have all the right components in your soil, it doesn't get processed. But you get a big giant flush of vegetation. For those of you who garden, if you put too much fertilizer on your tomato plants, you get these phenomenally big plants. There's no fruit, and the root structures are actually pretty weak, and they'll tip over in a windstorm. So the same thing is happening to all of our over fertilized coastal wetlands. And they'll start losing big chunks. Some of you may have seen that the peat crack, they start to crack and fall in. So too much carbon on this side. And how do we get, what happened? How do we get all that? Well, part of it is from what I mentioned before, and one of the big of all the, like the air pollution and that, but impervious cover is a huge deliverer of carbon, nitrogen, and contaminants right into our coastal wetlands. And when they're polluted, they don't process the carbon. They're not functioning properly. So this is from a EPA manual on bioswales. And you can see this beautiful salt marsh, piece of salt marsh behind it. And this is obviously a parking lot. So my guess is in the past, there was just a pipe that ran out here, and I've mapped a lot of those from my boat. And so all the tire bits and pieces and the oil drippings, pat waste, whatever, will go out down in there and start working on this marsh and decrease its ability to function. So what they did here is they directed all the flow into this sink. They probably have some geotextile fiber underneath this grate right here. These plants are grabbing the carbon and they're cleaning the water before it feeds out through the beach into that wetland. So they're not getting overloaded and they can process stuff. So how do you deal with all that impervious cover? You don't have to read this slide. I just put it up there. It's from a different presentation specifically on stormwater authorities. What a stormwater authority is, it's a municipal entity that focuses strictly on stormwater. And because otherwise you have to go off the general tax base to keep all the pipes and grates clean and everything functioning properly. And so people who aren't paying property tax, but are still driving on the road or working in a state building aren't contributing to fixing that system. And not only do we have to fix the system, all the clogs in the drains and the broken pipes and crossing with sewage, we need to start doing this green infrastructure that I showed you in the previous slide. We need thousands of rain gardens and bioswales. When the water's going down a road, it needs to go through a curb cut into a sink. And this needs to happen all over the place, in public right-of-ways, on people's houses. And if we do that, we're going to really take a lot of pressure off those coastal ecosystems that are getting too fertilized and too polluted. And they're going to be able to come back. Right now, they're barely hanging on. And this is a case in point. So this is from a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service report in 2015 that went back through old records and photos and maps back to the 1880s. And it's from New York DEC and Connecticut DEEP, the two agencies in charge of these types of habitats. And so you can see all the red is lost wetland. So if you go back prior to 1880, there was just a mass, the whole shoreline of the Connecticut side was wetlands. It's a lot rockier down by you folks, as you all know. I mean, there's some great places, right? Like right where you are, there was some good stuff. There still is because of Pelham, the park in there. And not so much on Long Island because they're big sandy bluffs. It's not really conducive to the coastal wetlands, but we've lost a tremendous amount. And that's because we started putting dams in the 1700s and to run all the grist mills and to make iron and to grind the corn. And then we put them in to create hydropower and electricity to make brass and make ammunition and all kinds of manufacturing. And so over time, as all that sediment was the food for these coastal ecosystems was cut off, they just lost their way. And then we dumped a bunch of fertilizer on them. And so they overgrew and the roots weren't able to hold it together. So they weren't getting nourished by fresh sediment, and what was there wasn't able to hold it together. And then eelgrass, because of all the nutrients coming in, blocking the light, they need a lot of light, and they need the right temperature and salinity. We've lost 90% of the eelgrass beds in Long Island Sound. So But fortunately, we have groups such as this one that are looking for the hidden jewels that are still around. And I was looking over the old map here. So on the left is all the estuary areas and the wetlands, both freshwater and tidal in the greater New York area that have been lost. So those are all the purple and pink. The green, even though they may be full of phragmites, like the meadowlands, still are wetlands and still function. And phragmites actually does process a lot of carbon. But if you go over here to your neck of the woods, there was a big marsh at the tip of the island. You still have the park preserving this stuff. But I know you guys have been talking and you just got funded. This is what you got funded for, correct? I mean, this is just a gorgeous little, look at the little cove in there. But you could see what happens if you don't have this type of shoreline. It's walls. And I don't know, Sid, is this the city island? Is this where we keep our boat? Kind of looks like it.
It's, you keep your boat, that's the yacht club. Yes, North Miniford Yacht Club is where you keep your boat. Yep.
Yep. So I don't know if I can see the boat down there, but you can see the walls over here and the walls over here. And I just testified on this in front of the legislature. I don't want to see a Long Island Sound that is just seawalls everywhere with no wetlands and no beaches, because that's where we're heading. I see permits come through for all these seawalls constantly. And the problem is, if you don't have that intertidal space, there's no place for the horseshoe crabs to breed. There's no place for the shorebirds to land and poke in the sand for food to refuel for the next part of their flight. So this is a gem you guys found, and I'm really happy to hear that the funding came through, because this will become a model for the island. It really will. Here's another example. Even if you do have a spot that's bad, maybe you can fix it. This was a parking lot out at Sunken Meadow State Park in Long Island, just near Smithtown Bay, if some of you may be familiar with it. And this was a rundown parking lot, probably kind of like Rye Playland. You know, it's sort of broken up. And we're actually potentially going to be getting into Rye Playland to do this very thing. It's on the list. And so it was dumping all the tire ablation, and there's a new chemical they just discovered. Well, it's been in tires that kills fish. So every time we drive this, it makes the tires elastic, makes them last longer, but it's also very lethal to fish when they come from salt water into fresh water and they're going through their osmoregulation. It's killing adult coho salmon in Seattle and Portland. They finally, after years, figured it out. It was a tire additive. So all that stuff is washing into here when the river herring are trying to come up, or the eels are kind of trying to come up, changing from salt water to fresh water. And what we did, our green eco restoration team put these big swales in here and restored a bunch of coastal marsh, over 4 acres of coastal wetland. And then we put in all these bioswales in here. So every time it rains, all the water goes down into those green structures. They all have curb cuts, and then it gets filtered by this giant sand filter that's obviously Long Island from the glacier days left underneath there. So the water in the estuary is cleaner. It looks a lot nicer. And this is the scale. We need to do hundreds and thousands of these projects, but we have to start somewhere. So one other component that is gaining steam is what your group is trying to do. So how do you use shellfish restoration aquaculture as part of this blue carbon cycle? So you have the coastal wetlands, but you're really going to want to have a reef just outside there to protect those wetlands from the waves and to further clean that water that's already being cleaned by that spongy wetland, which will help all Long Island Sound. I think this is the Brantford River, or Farm River in Brantford. This is where I keep my boat. This is Black Rock Harbor, has a sewage treatment plant from a 30 million gallon a day plant right next to it, maybe 40 feet away. And you can see it's bubbling up methane, which has carbon and nitrogen in it. And so it's a net emitter of carbon. That used to be in one of the toe of the biggest reef, shellfish reef in Long Island Sound. And now it's a soupy muck that's just off-gassing greenhouse gases. So it's been difficult to get the work going in Connecticut because they're scared of people moving oysters around and causing disease problems. But Sea Grant is finally realizing there's enough interest in groups like what you're doing and Billion Oyster Project and Cuomo's work with the hatchery out on Long Island and the Nature Conservancy. And there's a great project with clams out in the Great South Bay with Stony Brook. So they formed this group, which I was invited to sit on, and to expand the natural beds. And then we want to pick 3 sanctuaries that are not harvested, but just produce spat. Create these shoreline concepts to protect the wetlands and people's houses along the shore. Seaweed farming is another great extraction technique, has promise, and then trying to mix species together. So traditionally, this is what happens. You have a closed area of the mouth of the Housatonic River. These guys are all catching seed oysters. Now, one of the biggest operators, Norm Bloom, will send his boat up there twice a day and deck load a bunch of these tiny oysters, and he spreads them out in clean water off the Norwalk Islands and other places. And he'll grow them for a few years, and then harvest them for 3. And then he exports those out of state, some local sales. So though all the nutrients being taken from that are getting in 18-wheelers and going up to Boston or getting trucked down to Florida. So we're removing those nutrients from Long Island Sound. Now we're probably causing problems in Boston Harbor, but that's for their wastewater treatment plants to deal with. And so that's a traditional way, and it works, and it's very important. It's a $30 million industry in Long Island Sound. And they also get involved in restoration. So last year, they couldn't sell their oysters because all the restaurants were shut down. There was no market. They lost 90% of their business. So FEMA put through some funding, and the Connecticut Department of Bureau of Aquaculture bought all the oversized oysters, because if you hold on to them for too long, the market doesn't like them. So what they did is they asked the fishermen, and they paid them to go into these state lease beds that hadn't been touched in years. And all those fines that were coming down the rivers were covering up the oyster grounds. So they weren't functioning. They weren't moving those carbon and nitrogen nutrients, and they were smothered. So they went in and they cleaned them all up. They raked them and did the clam dredging. And then they threw all these oversized oysters on there to start sprouting natural seed production. So that's a before and after picture. And I promised Peter Linderoth I'd put one in on seaweed. And so this is still a work in progress because they're having a hard time finding markets. But Sea Grant just made it a theme of their last grant round to look at marketing solutions for kelp. So in the next year or 2, there should be some great reports coming out about what you can do. And this stuff grows so fast, up to 20 feet long. You can see the production here. So it's taking all that carbon out of the system that has too much carbon, too much nitrogen, pulling it out, putting it into biomass. I put this stuff, I do like organic gardening, and I have organic trees, and I use kelp meal on them as a soil amendment. It's really good stuff. Or you can eat it. So we're going to look at this hopefully in the future as another major way to naturally get the carbon out. And then part of the Shellfish Restoration Committee's products is going to be this restoration mapper. And the seaweed one up on the top is where you could be doing seaweed. So pink is not suitable. Green's really suitable. Yellow somewhere in the middle. Now, if you notice, the bays and harbors they haven't decided yet if that's good for seaweed or not. Now, Save the Sound is a 100-foot line in the water of kelp out of Mamaroneck. It's a DEC grant. So we're starting to look in here. And if you remember, the Unified Water Study is sampling a lot of these bays and harbors. So we're going to have data that's going to get incorporated into this model that will help inform what color all the bays and harbors become. It may work, it may not, but it will be good to have an outline. And why this is important for oyster reefs is this model down here, which is from North Carolina, I think. What they do is they look at all the harbors, the marinas, they look at the environmental data. Does it have the right salinity, the right depth, the right substrate on the bottom for the oysters? They put it all together, and then they come up with this color code, this suitability index, and it'll say, hey, you don't want to do an oyster restoration project in the red. You're going to fail. But hey, look, here's green over here, but look at this big banana of green here. And in that, there's some real green. So maybe we dot a bunch of restoration projects along here to create this big giant reef and return that reef function to that whole coastline. So that's coming soon, and I'm pretty sure they're talking very closely with New York. So I think the whole methodology, and DEC has a pretty good mapper too. I think they're going to bring them all together. And I imagine the work you guys are doing and working with Peter on the water quality loggers you're going to put out are going to get fed into this model. So you guys are kind of on the cutting edge of this. So I'm just going to run through the projects that I know about. Did Peter Solomon talk to you guys?
We've been in touch with him, and he's actually doing a webinar in a month.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, no, we've been, and we're gonna go do a field trip up to New Haven, see his school.
Excellent. He's fantastic. And so I won't steal his thunder. I just have one slide, but these are their reef balls, and here's their school right here. So they scuba dive out to the reef balls, and they check them out, and they have, and they do all the monitoring, and it's working really well. It might be something you guys want to consider. That's great you're connected, because he's been doing it for a couple years now, and he's got some hard lessons that he learned. Here's another one. You can see these are reef balls are deployed. This is at Stratford Point, the mouth of the Housatonic River. This is an Audubon preserve area. And Jen Matai is a professor at Sacred Heart University who led this project. I was also involved in lobbying at the legislature. This is also a horseshoe crab sanctuary now. So you can harvest the horseshoe crabs for bait here. And this is all native vegetation. These are all native coastal grasses that were planted. All the invasives were removed. And here they bought the flats. This actually is Joe Gresco, who was a campaign manager for Terry Backer, who was the first Long Island Soundkeeper and one of the original 8 keepers that formed the Waterkeeper Alliance, which is now an international organization. We're in 44 countries with like 350 waterkeepers doing the work that I do. So he was Terry's campaign manager. When Terry died, he ran for his seat. So he's been in the state legislature since, I don't know, 2015. And he just got made co-chair of the environment. And he's a good buddy of mine. This is a picture of him planting. So we're working with him to try and make sure the state's providing funding for these projects like you're trying to do by the school. And then you guys, I'm almost to the end here, and then we can talk. The reason this is such a neat project is because of the vision. Talking with you guys over different times, you know, you have the old maps of where the reefs used to be, and you're talking about extending potentially out towards Throg's Neck. And we know there's a lot of shellfish over by Westchester to the other side of the Bronx. And we're actually talking with DEC, Peter is about working on a budget with him to go out and do the actual state testing that could potentially reopen the Westchester beds. Because then you can start getting in there, getting the muck and stuff out of those beds, get them up to the surface, get things spruced up, and get that carbon machine pumping. Start pulling those nutrients, start filtering that water. And you know, with the equipment we're going to buy from that lawsuit, Terry Backer was the one that sued the Pelham landfill for all the leachate destroying wetlands over there. Like I said before, this is going to be a model of ours. We go into an area, paint the picture of the environment. If there's a local group like yours that's interested, you know, assist getting things going and just start moving around Long Island Sound, trying to do the same thing. So in conclusion, these are the things we need to do. That's why I showed you the geology part in the first. We have to look at it as a holistic action. If we want functioning coastal ecosystems, we need to fix the watersheds as well. That means dealing with the impervious cover and getting rid of the dams. So those are 2 things that have to happen online at scale to take the pressure off all the coastal areas. And then use these mapping tools that are being identified to take what resources we do have and focus first on the low-hanging fruit, the best places that are most likely to succeed, to show everybody it can work. And then really embrace both the aquaculture industry as a viable part of this moving system, this nutrient cycling, stabilizing system in the sound with the restoration work such as you guys are doing, and try and mix it up with eelgrass and clams and sugar kelp and oyster reefs and planting coastal wetlands. So that's what I have. Was very focused towards Long Island Sound. I know the Blue Carbon Initiative was really focused out on the West Coast, but I thought it would be more appropriate. And the last thing I'll say, that obviously the reason to do this is because I want to see horseshoe crabs. I don't want to see seawalls like I mentioned. Here's a little girl down in a wetland area outside of West Haven. It's an eco day camp they've been doing for years. And she's very intently explaining to me the biology of this tiny little horseshoe crab that she caught. There must have been 50 kids down there catching crabs. So hopefully, in 100 years, they're still doing that. And that's what I have.
Well, we cannot thank you enough, Bill.
Sure.
You've given us tremendous food for thought. And, it's so inspiring hearing you talk about blue carbon and giving us so much inspiration and ideas of future things that we can do. And I'm sure there are questions out there. Do you have some time to take some questions?
Yeah, sure, certainly.
Does anyone out there have a question?
I did put 2 of them into the chat.
Yeah, there's the chat. You should look at that.
I saw that, Louis. You asked about CSOs. Do you want to?
Yeah, CSO percentages in terms of volume of water versus MS4s in Connecticut. I don't have a good feeling for that.
So I think I heard you're breaking up a little bit. The volume of CSOs in Connecticut, is that what you were asking?
Yeah, versus the MS4s.
Oh, yeah. So that's a really good question. I don't think we have a really good handle on the MS4s, though I'm sure it exists, because the Yukon did do the impervious cover, and you can calculate the amount of rain that falls across the landscape. I doubt it's fine-tuned because all the mapping hasn't really been ground truth. That's what all the towns are supposed to be doing right now, and they're all behind. And our lawyer just sent a nasty letter to 140 towns or 120 towns reminding them that their retrofit plans are due, which would really answer that question. But the CSOs, depends on the year if it's raining. I tried to calculate it by the Sewage Right to Know website. There's one of those in New York also, but they report in ranges, 5 million to 10 million gallon overflow, or 500,000 to 1 million gallon overflow. So I started totaling it up towards the average of that. But it's not a complete record. They actually are redoing the whole thing, and we have legislation that we were championing this year. It looks like it's going to pass to really upgrade that. So it's more useful. But talking to the regulators at DEEP, it can be as high as 1 billion gallons a year on a wet year of CSOs discharging direct raw sewage into the waters of Connecticut.
Yeah, I really was kind of interested in knowing whether or not the aggregate of the MS4s produce a bigger volume of pollution than the CSOs.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I don't think I can answer it specifically because there's obviously different pollution sources in those 2 runoffs. But that's a really good question. I'm going to look into that because I'd love to be able to have that information and share it with legislators, because we're really working hard on the MS4. We have 2 pieces of legislation to get stormwater authorities enabled in Connecticut. We were successful at Save the Sound of getting a pilot project done about 11 years ago, but only 4 towns qualified, and only one of them went through the pain at the council level to actually get one formed. But they're doing great. It's New London, and they just had money. They bought a pump. It stopped the flooding downtown. They're getting their system back in order, and then they're going to have money to be able to go for Long Island Sound Future grants or 319 grants to maybe start doing some of these green projects. What we're trying to do is enable every town in the state of Connecticut, if they so choose, to form a stormwater authority. And we were also in the governor's bill. So we have a standalone bill, and we got put in the governor's climate and adaptation bill, and we were the first section. Of course, we're getting beat up by folks who don't want to pay any more fees. So that's been fun. Negotiating with the airports, and the hospitals have their own deal, and there's all kinds of trouble. I have talked to some of the folks that New York, it's an even tougher sell. This is my son, Henry. You saw a picture of him in this. He's a little swamp man. And the, can you get down for a second? Oh, he's getting heavy. So New York, I think it's going to be harder. I was talking to, I don't know if you guys know Adrienne Esposito. She's kind of a big wig in the environmental. She's with Citizen Campaign for the Environment out of Long Island. And she's like, it's just not going to fly in New York. May or may not be the case, but the thing is, if everybody, so in New London, if you have 0 to 1,000 square feet of impervious surface, you know, a small, modest house, you're going to be paying $7.50 a quarter. So that comes out to $2.50 a month. If you have 2,000 square feet of impervious surface, you're looking at $5 a month. So if you have small houses, it's really not a huge cost. And the thing is, it's regular money. So if you want to look at FEMA as a funding source, there's one program called BRIC. They really need to know that you're able to pay for some of these initiatives. So you could form one of these, say, hey, we're generating 1.2 million a year. It's regular, it's coming. FEMA will go, okay, we'll engage in a big project with you. And maybe you guys will start putting in, you know, 15 to 50 rain gardens a year. And then once the whole area is all rain gardened and disconnected, you can take the fee away or you can reduce it. So that's, you know, that's really the only way I see dealing with the MS4, because it's non-point, right? It's not like it's a sewage pipe where you can go after their permit. It's all of us. We're all contributing.
Rob, you had a question, I think, about Sea Grant out in Connecticut.
It actually was a question about the slide, which was so striking. It looked like an oyster reef, an oyster bed at a bend in a river. And I was just curious where that was. Is that a current scene from Connecticut? Because it's really quite a striking, amazing view.
Yeah, so that is up, I'm pretty sure it's the Farm River, and it was taken by our boss, our president, Kurt Johnson, who has a little shack, a summer shack at the end of that river. And so he usually clams down in the lower area, but he decided to go upriver in his kayak one day at low tide, and he was like, he didn't know it was there.
Those are oysters and not mussels, or
those are oysters.
That's fantastic. I mean, it's just, that is an amazing picture. That's really, really cool.
Yeah.
The Farm River, FARM.
Yep.
Huh.
In Brantford, Connecticut. And
Wow.
so that shows us what it could be, right?
Yeah,
That's why
exactly.
it's so important what you guys are doing. If you can recreate an example for everyone to see by the school there, you know, then maybe some private landowners will go, you know what? I want to join that. I'm going to do that on my property, you know? So there is hope. It's kind of like the Alamo. There's a few of these little holdout areas that aren't completely obliterated yet.
Mike Carew has a couple of questions, and I can't quite get it from the chat. It's regarding the Larchmont breakwater silting in clam beds at Rye Pier, but I'm not sure what the actual Mike, are you there? You may not. Oh, there you are. There you are, Mike. Can you?
You're on mute.
Okay,
There you go.
got me?
Yep, got you.
Oh, okay. How we doing, Bill? Excellent presentation there. So, at the Larchmont breakwater, I've been diving at for, you know, over 30 something years. And we used to, you know, that was a great spot for lobster and getting fish, different things, you know. We still do some dives up in the area, but at the when we dove it years and years ago, the depth at the base of the breakwaters were usually about 25, maybe even 30 foot of water. It was sandy, shelly bottom. It was great. And now it's silted in. It's, now it's only maybe 10 foot deep. And, both on the east and the west side. And I guess like kind of the question is, you talked about, you needed the silt, coming down from the dams. It's probably a different type of sediment or whatever to help, but again, the life at the breakwater is not as healthy as it was. Of course, it's probably also with the water quality, different things. And then the other thing I wanted to kind of like bring up, the other part of the question was the right pier. I've done quite a bit of diving up there also, and the bottom, the pier is, I mean, there's so much clam life up there too, And you were talking about, mixing up the bottom, and then that question came up when you talked about the parking lot,
Right.
So
Yeah. So, well, with the silt, the tough one, right? Because that happened in Norwalk Harbor also. They've been doing an otter trawl there with Harbor Watch for 30 years. And when they first started, it was full of little winter flounder. It was a sandy bottom. And then now it's silt, muck, and the diversity and the number of fish have gone way down. They've
Right.
lost some species. It's gotten hotter. That's a big part of it, is it's getting warm. And think of how many people lived here 30 years ago compared to now.
Right.
I mean, we're growing and growing and growing. So more and more of that landscape's getting covered. A lot of those fines are coming off of the roadways. They're throwing tons of sand and stuff on the roadways. And that's the thing with the dams, is they're blocking the heavier stuff, the sand. So the
Right.
sand's not making it down to rivers anymore, just the fine stuff.
Right.
And you're getting this black gooey layer, and it's
Right.
baking, it's hotter, the water's getting hotter. So
Right.
that's when there's too much carbon. It's got too much organic material in it. And the only option in my mind there is, well, there's two options. There's one that Mumford Cove in Connecticut, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago, had a sewer pipe going into it. This is Great South Bay, same thing on Long
Right.
Island on the outside, and they moved them. So all that carbon and nitrogen pumping into those areas, creating that nasty goo, they removed it. Now they actively planted shellfish as our shellfish restoration, the Great South Bay, and the fishing for clams for the commercial guys, the baymen, went up 700% last year. I mean, they're just upstream pumping tons of baby clams down. The water's much cleaner. They're helping clean it. And I'm up in Mumford. What they did is they just let it go. So remember that one slide I had of the eelgrass with the low organic matter and the high organic matter? They let the bugs eat all that goo up because they weren't putting any more in. It took 15 years, but they finally ate it. Now the water's clearing up for eelgrass to go back in. But down there, I think you're going to have to dredge. I mean, if you want to dredge back down to that sand and then set it back up again, I don't really see any other way in an area like that, unless you got some other ideas.
No, I was kind of looking at what you were thinking, because you're saying, you wanted to build up, for some of that, sand and barrier and stuff. Would they add a material to that to, put a cap on it, or, but
Yeah, I mean, you look at where the wetlands were, because you
Right.
want deep, clear channels, right? Because that's where your lobsters are. You're not going to be eating the fiddler crabs over the other side of the breakaway. That might be all coastal marsh.
Right.
So yeah, you want the deposition in different areas, and you want a mix of habitat types. It's tough, and of course, New York is always is suing Connecticut now over dumping the dredge material. Obviously, the guys in Westchester and the Bronx are all for it because everyone's getting silted in. And in Long Island, there's no rivers; it's all sand, so they're not really having an issue with dredging so much. And that's a big war. We stay out of that one.
Yeah. And then the kind of like last thing is, I told a lot of people, Sally and a couple of people, years and years ago, I used to be one of the captains on the RV Oceanic when it was out of Stanford
Oh.
before it went up to Norwalk. You know, when I was running the boat in like '84 or so, and when you know, in the Maritime Center was just a dream when they were talking about it. I don't know if you know any of the people that were involved in the original planning, or Chris from actually my boss was Chris Roosevelt, who had the Oceanic magazine. I don't know if you.
Yeah, I vaguely remember that. Yeah, I left in '87. So I went Massachusetts and then Vermont, and then I went down in Guatemala and then up to Alaska for 20 years and over to Hawaii and back. So it was great when they had made the aquarium, because I didn't have that as a kid. It wasn't built yet, right?
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I work very closely with the aquarium today, but I don't know the folks who originally set it up. That's exciting that you were in on the ground level of that one.
Yeah, yeah. Well, like you said, I was just around. I was just, the captain, boat captain, but listening to everybody talk, and like you said, the time zone warp, like the speed, like, they were talking about it. Now it's there. Where did time go? All great things, and so it's kind of funny, like, just to look back and listen to this going on, back in the '80s, and here it is now, and where we are today with all this.
Yeah, well, we're trying to fix it more than we were back then. You remember how bad the water was especially the early '80s, man. The lobsters were crawling out of the ocean. It was bad. That's why I left. I'm like, I'm going to go up to where it's clean in Vermont, and I'm going to go all the way up to Alaska, where you just pull the shrimp out of the pot and just eat them right there on the boat. I wouldn't do that in the Sound.
Well, I had firsthand experience. I used to be a diver for the NYPD in the early '80s. When 180 million gallons of raw sewage per day before they had the sewer treatment plants. So I not only did I see it, I lived it.
Swam it. Yeah.
If I turn the lights out, I'll glow.
Bill, do you have time for one last question?
I do.
Okay, just one last question in the chat. With all the great work and money being spent for restoration, what is the outlook for those areas in 30 to 40 years with a conservative minimum 3-foot rise in sea level, plus the impacts of an anticipated increase of very heavy weather?
Yeah, well, that's why we're scrambling now. That's why I wanted to show everybody the big maps and the watershed and the whole thing. We really need to jump this thing up to scale real fast, because it is coming. The sea level rise is coming up, and we're so built up that where the marsh is going to migrate, I mean, we need to figure out where we want them in the future if we want to have this blue carbon system still existing in Long Island Sound. So there's a model called a SLAM model. There's FEMA money that's done buybacks for housing in West Haven. They still have that program that's becoming more common in other countries. Just pull the houses out of the lowlands all along the coast, compensate the owners, and let the marshes take over, because they're going to get damaged anyway in the storms, and let all that stuff move back upland a little bit. There's a big initiative for the offshore wind. So it really looks by 2050, even though we won't stop what's coming at us right now, that, I mean, just a new infrastructure bill that was announced, they're talking about, was it 30,000 megawatts or something of wind power? I mean, my God. So we're really switching away from coal and natural gas and all of that stuff. And the whole world's doing it. Europe's way ahead of us. Germany's got like 70% renewable. So we can cut those carbon off at the source and fix the system so it produces, or it cycles that carbon. I don't know, 50-50 will be okay. I really don't know. I mean, we're just throwing everything at it we can. It's just such a huge system. You just don't know when you've gone too far and the thing's going to come at you like a slow moving train. The big frightening one right now is, and I've known about this for years, is the slowing of the Gulf Stream. And that's driving a lot of the sea level rise, right? The cold water, fresh water is coming off the Greenland ice cap, hitting the Gulf Stream, it's backing it up and making it drop down. And the Gulf Stream's raised up. It's a river. It's ripping. And as it slows down, it spreads out like a bathtub. That's why Long Island Sound and everywhere else is getting the sea level rise from the river displacing, not just the ice melting and it coming up like a bathtub. Plus, as the water gets warmer, the water molecules expand. So we're gonna, yeah, our section of the coast, New Jersey up to like Massachusetts, is definitely gonna see some changes. So the more we can prepare now, just give the coastline back to the swamp, the coastal marshes. Just let it back away. I mean, the taxpayers can't keep bailing people out every time their house that's like right at the breakwater gets knocked down by a storm. I don't want to pay for that. I don't want my flood insurance to go through the roof so I can't afford my mortgage because some other folks are pushing the line. There's the day of reckoning is coming because we can't do things like we used to do. So there's been a lot of positive direction. I think a lot of it's going to be addressed. We're a resilient country, and people in general are resilient. They adapt.
Well, Bill, we've taken up a lot of your time this evening, and really thank you for a fascinating lecture on blue carbon. You have us all charged up to do what we can do in our local environments. So we really thank you for that. And for all that you guys do for in Save the Sound to help us all at the western end of Long Island Sound make our waters cleaner.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Sid, the oyster man. So yeah, thanks guys. And I love your group, and hopefully we'll get those water logging devices out this fall. That's the plan.
Great.
So, we'll hopefully see you guys in person.
We'll get you out here soon. Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Sid.
Bye, y'all.
Bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.